There's something magical about the quiet moments before a great journey begins. The hush of the wind, the weight of destiny pressing against your shoulders, the knowing that every step forward will change everything. Tonight, we step into one of those moments with Aragorn, the rightful heir of Gondor, as he stands atop the ancient ruins of Amon Sûl, gazing eastward toward the looming shadows of Mordor. The air is thick with tension, the kind that settles deep in your bones, and if you listen closely, you might even hear the whisper of the wind, carrying secrets of the darkness, gathering beyond the horizon. Wherever you are right now, whether it's late at night or the early hours of the morning, we'd love to know, what time is it where you are, and what does the night feel like outside your window? Let us know in the comments below, because tonight, we're all sharing in this moment together. Aragorn's fingers tighten around the hilt of Andúril, the flame of the west, its blade gleaming faintly under the starlight. This sword is more than steel, it's a symbol of his birthright, a reminder of the vow he made to reclaim Gondor's throne and restore its glory. But with that promise comes a burden heavier than any crown. The blood of kings runs through his veins, and with it, the weight of centuries of history, of battles fought and lost, of a kingdom waiting for its rightful ruler to return. Can you feel it? The quiet resolve in his stance, the way the night itself seems to hold its breath. This isn't just a story about a man stepping into his destiny. It's about the courage it takes to face the unknown, to carry the hopes of an entire people on your shoulders. And yet, even as Aragorn stands there, the wind carries another sound, a distant murmur, faint but unmistakable. The forces of Sauron are stirring, their shadows stretching ever closer. The peace of this moment is fragile, a fleeting calm before the storm, but that's what makes it so powerful, isn't it? The knowledge that soon, the road ahead will be fraught with danger, sacrifice, and choices that will test the very core of who he is. Tonight, we'll walk beside Aragorn as he begins this journey, feeling every step, every doubt, every flicker of hope. So settle in, wherever you are, and let the quiet of the night wrap around you. This is more than a story. It's an invitation to step into Middle-earth, to stand beside a king in the making, and to discover what it truly means to embrace your destiny. The journey begins now. The firelight in Rivendell's hall flickers against the ancient stone walls, casting long shadows as Aragorn stands before Elrond and Gandalf, the weight of their words pressing against him like a gathering storm. Elrond's voice is measured, his eyes reflecting centuries of wisdom and caution. To claim your birthright now would draw the eye of Sauron too soon, he warns, the gravity of his words settling over the room like mist over a valley. The ring must be destroyed before Gondor's heir steps from the shadows. The enemy must not see you coming, but Gandalf leans forward, his staff resting between his hands, his gaze unwavering. The time for hiding is past, Aragorn. The people of Middle-earth need hope, and hope wears a crown. You cannot outrun your destiny, and not when the world's fate hangs in the balance. Aragorn turns away, his hand resting on the hilt of Andúril, the cool metal, a reminder of the throne he has spent a lifetime refusing. The fear is a quiet, relentless thing, not of death or battle, but of failing those who would look to him as king. What if the blood of Númenor is not enough? What if the strength of his lineage crumbles under the weight of Sauron's darkness? The doubt gnaws at him, but beneath it, something else stirs, the memory of his mother's voice, the stories of his ancestors, the unbroken line of kings stretching back through the ages. He is Isildur's heir, whether he wishes it or not. And then there's Frodo, small, burdened, standing at the edge of the council, with the weight of the ring heavy in his palm. Aragorn's eyes meet the hobbits, and in that moment, the path ahead sharpens into clarity. He cannot turn away, not from Frodo, not from the duty that has found him at last. "I will go with you," he says, the words quiet but unshakable. "To Mordor." The decision settles into his bones, a vow stronger than steel. He may not yet be ready to claim the throne, but he will not abandon those who need him. The council disperses, the echoes of their debate lingering in the air, but Aragorn remains, staring into the fire. This is the beginning of something far greater than a journey. It's the first step toward a reckoning with Sauron, with his own fears, with the legacy he has spent a lifetime resisting. The road to Mordor is treacherous, but it's also the road to himself. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carries the faintest whisper of a crown, waiting to be claimed. The morning mist clung to the valley floor as the fellowship crossed the bridge from Rivendell, their footsteps light but purposeful. Aragorn walked at the front, his cloak pulled close against the chill, eyes scanning the tree line for movement. Each member carried their own quiet thoughts, Boromir's grip tight on his sword hilt, Legolas's gaze distant, as if listening to the whispers of the wind, Gimli muttering about the foolishness of elves and their long farewells. But it was Frodo who lingered at the back, his fingers brushing the ring beneath his shirt, a weight no one else could see. Aragorn fell into step beside him, matching the hobbit's shorter strides. "The road will grow darker," he said softly, "but you need not walk it alone." Frodo glanced up, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, and for a moment, the unspoken understanding between them was enough. The path into the misty mountains was treacherous, the air thinning as they climbed, the rocks slick with frost. Aragorn's hands were steady as he helped the others over jagged outcrops, his voice calm even as the wind howled around them. But then came the sound, a low rumble, distant at first, then building into a deafening roar. The mountainside trembled, and before anyone could react, the path ahead shattered in a cascade of stone and dust. Aragorn shouted a warning, shoving Merry and Pippin back as boulders crashed where they'd stood moments before. The way forward was gone. Silence fell, broken only by labored breathing. Boromir's face was pale. "We cannot go back," he said. Aragorn knew what that meant. There was only one path left, Moria. The name alone was enough to tighten his chest. Even Gandalf's expression darkened, but when Aragorn met the wizard's eyes, he saw no hesitation, only resolve. "If the mountain denies us passage, we take the road beneath it," Gandalf declared. The others murmured, fear and doubt thick in the air, but Aragorn simply nodded. He had led men through worse. The mines of Moria swallowed them whole, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. Aragorn kept his sword drawn, every sense alert, his ears straining for sounds beyond their footsteps. Then came the drums, deep, rhythmic, pulsing through the stone like a heartbeat. The orcs were coming. What followed was chaos, arrows whistling through the air, the clash of steel, Gimli's axe meeting bone. Through it all, Aragorn fought like a man possessed, his blade a blur, his voice rallying the others even as the tide of enemies seemed endless. But the real blow came later, In the depths of Khazad-dûm, when the Balrog emerged from the shadows, Gandalf stood alone on the bridge, his staff blazing with light, his voice thunderous as he faced the demon. "You shall not pass." The words echoed through the chamber, and for a heartbeat, it seemed the wizard had won. Then the bridge gave way. Aragorn's cry was raw, torn from his throat as Gandalf fell, swallowed by the abyss. The loss hit like a physical blow, but there was no time to grieve. The orcs were still coming, the fellowship was broken, and the weight of leadership settled onto Aragorn's shoulders with crushing finality. He herded the others forward, his voice sharp with urgency. "Run." They stumbled into daylight, gasping, their faces streaked with dirt and grief. Boromir gripped Aragorn's arm. "You lead now," he said, the words heavy with unspoken trust. Aragorn didn't answer. His eyes were on Frodo, who stood apart, his small frame trembling. The ring's pull was growing stronger. Aragorn knew what that meant, too. The road ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand choices that could break even the strongest of hearts. But as the wind stirred the grass around them, carrying the scent of distant forests, he squared his shoulders. The fellowship would go on, and so would he. The golden leaves of Lothlórien shimmered like tears in the twilight, their gentle rustling the only sound as Aragorn knelt by the silver basin, his reflection wavering in the water. The grief was a living thing, coiled tight around his ribs. Gandalf's absence, a hollow space no words could fill. How many times had the Wizards' Council steadied him? How many battles had they faced side by side? Now, the weight of leadership pressed down on him, heavier than the armor he wore. The Fellowship looked to him, their trust unspoken but unwavering, and the fear of failing them was sharper than any blade. A voice, soft as the evening breeze, broke the silence. Even the strongest hearts must bend beneath such sorrow. Galadriel stood beside him, her presence both serene and vast, like the ancient trees surrounding them. Aragorn did not rise, but his shoulders tensed. "I have led men into darkness before," he admitted, his voice rough, but never with so much at stake. "If I falter, you fear the legacy of your blood," Galadriel interrupted, not unkindly. "Isildur's choice haunts you, as though his weakness were yours to inherit." Her eyes held his, seeing deeper than the surface, deeper than the scars. "But you are not Isildur, Aragorn. You are the man who has spent a lifetime protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The man who walks into shadow, so others may stand in the light." The truth of her words settled over him, but the doubt lingered. And if that is not enough? Galadriel's hand lifted, and in her palm lay a gem, green as spring leaves after rain, its heart catching the light like a promise. "The Elessar," she said. "A stone of renewal, borne by those who bring hope to the weary. It was said to heal the hurts of Middle-earth, but its true power lies in reminding the bearer of their own strength." She pressed it into his hand, and the warmth of it seeped into his skin. "You carry more than a sword, Aragorn. You carry the faith of those who follow you. Let that be your compass when the road grows dark." Aragorn closed his fingers around the stone, the weight of it solid, real. The grief remained, but beneath it, something kindled, a quiet ember of resolve. Gandalf had believed in him. Frodo still did. And now, Galadriel's gift was a tangible reminder. Hope was not lost so long as he refused to surrender it. He stood, the Elessar tucked close, and turned his face toward the path ahead. The woods of Lothlórien would offer no more shelter. Beyond its borders, the land grew wilder, the shadows deeper. Sauron's forces gathered, the ring's pull tightened, but Aragorn's step was firm as he rejoined the fellowship, his voice steady when he spoke. We rest tonight. At dawn, we move forward. The others nodded, their faces drawn but determined. No grand speeches, no vows, just the silent understanding that they would face whatever came together. And as the stars pricked the sky above the Malorn trees, Aragorn allowed himself one last moment of stillness, the Elessar a quiet pulse against his chest. The road ahead would demand everything of him, but for the first time since Gandalf's fall, he did not walk it alone. The air smelled of damp earth and crushed ferns as Aragorn sprinted through the woods, his breath coming fast and sharp. Boromir's horn still echoed in his ears, that desperate, fading call, but it was the sight of the Uruk-hai dragging Merry and Pippin into the trees that burned behind his eyes. Every instinct screamed to follow Frodo, to protect the ring-bearer, but the hobbits' cries had been unmistakable. They were alive, and they were helpless. Aragorn's jaw tightened as he vaulted over a fallen log, his boots skidding on wet leaves. The choice had been made in a heartbeat, yet its weight settled into his bones with every step. Frodo had Sam. Frodo had the strength to choose his own path, but Merry and Pippin, they had no one. The Uruk-hai moved like a black tide through the forest, their armor clanking, their snarls guttural. Aragorn's fingers curled around Andúril's hilt, but he held back. Attacking now would be suicide. Instead, he shadowed them, silent as the dusk, his mind racing. These were no ordinary orcs. They marched with purpose, disciplined and swift, toward the open plains of Rohan, and that was a problem. If they reached the grasslands, the hobbits would be lost. Legolas and Gimli caught up, their faces grim. We cannot let them cross into Rohan, Legolas murmured, his eyes tracking the distant torches. Gimli hefted his axe. Then we make our stand here. But Aragorn shook his head. They outnumber us 50 to 1. We need a better plan. His gaze flicked to the riverbank, where the Uruk-hai were forcing the hobbits toward crude rafts. Time was running out, then chaos. The Uruk-hai captain roared an order, and the rafts shoved off, the current carrying them swiftly downstream. Aragorn didn't hesitate. He plunged into the icy water, the shock of it stealing his breath, but he swam harder, his muscles burning. Behind him, Legolas's arrows found their marks, buying precious seconds. One raft capsized, Uruk-hai flailing, but the other raced ahead, Merry and Pippin's small forms barely visible in the melee. Aragorn's lungs screamed for air, but he pushed forward, his fingers brushing the edge of the raft. A hand seized his wrist. Boromir, the man's face was pale, his armor rent by arrows, but his grip was iron. I tried to take the ring, he gasped, blood flecking his lips. Forgive me. The words were a dagger to Aragorn's heart. There was no time for anger, no room for judgment, only sorrow. You fought bravely, Aragorn said, gripping his shoulder. Rest now, but Boromir's eyes were desperate. Save them, the little ones. His breath hitched. My city, my people. And then he was gone. Aragorn closed Boromir's eyes with trembling fingers, the weight of loss pressing down like a stone. But grief would have to wait. The raft was vanishing around the bend, the hobbit's fate slipping away with it. He hauled himself onto the bank, water streaming from his clothes, his resolve hardening into something cold and unyielding. The Uruk-hai would pay for this, and Rohan, the land of horse lords, now shadowed by rumors of a weakened king and whispers of war, would either be their salvation or their grave. Legolas and Gimli waded ashore, their faces etched with the same determination. No words were needed. They would follow, they would fight, and somewhere in the wilds ahead, two small hobbits clung to hope, unaware that the heir of Gondor was coming for them, his every step a promise written in blood and steel. The fellowship was broken, but Aragorn's duty had only just begun. The grasslands of Rohan stretched endlessly under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the wind carrying the scent of rain and distant fire. Aragorn's legs ached from the relentless pursuit, his boots worn thin by miles of unforgiving earth, but he did not slow. Beside him, Legolas moved with the grace of the wind itself, his eyes scanning the horizon, while Gimli's muttered curses were a steady rhythm beneath the rustle of the tall grass. They had followed the Uruk-hai's trail for days. The signs growing fresher trampled earth, discarded armor, the occasional dark smear of blood, and then, at last, the thunder of hooves. A line of riders crested the hill ahead, their spears glinting like teeth against the stormlight. The lead rider, tall, golden-haired, his face hardened by war, raised a hand, and his company halted in perfect unison. Éomer, Aragorn knew him at once, though they had never met. The man's bearing spoke of noble blood, but his eyes were wary, his grip tight on his sword. "You tread on the land of the mark, strangers," he called, his voice cutting through the wind. "Name yourselves, or be counted among our enemies." Aragorn stepped forward, his hands open, his posture calm but unwavering. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. These are my companions, Legolas of the Woodland Realm and Gimli, son of Gloin. We seek two halflings taken by Uruk-hai." Éomer's expression flickered surprise, then suspicion. "Halflings, you chase children's tales while Rohan bleeds." His gaze darkened. "Saruman's filth pours from Isengard, burning our villages, slaughtering our people. We have no time for lost causes." Aragorn did not flinch. "Then let us help you fight. The enemy we pursue serves the same master." Their captain carried the mark of the White Hand. Silence. The riders exchanged glances. Éomer's jaw tightened, but something in Aragorn's voice, the weight of truth, the echo of a kinship older than their quarrel, gave him pause. "You speak like a man of the north, yet your words carry the cadence of Gondor. And you speak like a man who has seen too much war to trust easily," Aragorn countered. "But I knew your uncle Theoden in better days. I rode with the Rohirrim as a younger man. If you doubt me, let my blade prove my worth." The challenge hung in the air. Then, with a sharp gesture, Éomer signaled his riders to stand down. "We found no halflings in the orcs' ranks," he admitted, his tone grudging, "but we slew them all the same. If your friends live, they are beyond our reach now." His eyes locked onto Aragorn's. "Yet you carry yourself like a king, and Rohan has need of such men. Ride with us to Helm's Deep. If Saruman's army comes, as we fear it will, we will need every sword." The offer was not without risk. Every moment spent away from Merry, and Pippin gnawed at Aragorn's conscience. But the greater threat was clear. Saruman's forces, unchecked, would drown Rohan in fire and blood. And if Rohan fell, Gondor would stand alone. Aragorn nodded. "We ride with you." The Rohirrim parted, making space for them on spare horses. As Aragorn swung into the saddle, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of horns from the east. Not the clear call of Rohan's riders, but something deeper, more terrible, the drums of Isengard. Éomer heard it too. His face went grim. "They come." The company spurred their horses into a gallop, the plains blurring beneath them. Aragorn leaned into the rhythm of the ride, his thoughts racing. Helm's Deep was a fortress of old, its walls thick, its defenses strong. But against Saruman's endless tide, would it be enough? And what of Theoden? The king was said to be ensnared by whispers, his mind clouded, his strength waning. If Rohan's leader could not rally his people, no wall would save them. Yet even as the first drops of rain began to fall, Aragorn felt something kindle in his chest, not hope, not yet, but the stubborn refusal to surrender it. The Rohirrim were a proud people, their hearts as fierce as their steeds, and if their king had forgotten his strength, perhaps a stranger's hand could remind him. The storm was coming, but so were they. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the stone walls of Helm's Deep slick and dark as the first wave of orcs crashed against the gates. Aragorn stood shoulder to shoulder with the men of Rohan, his sword glinting in the torchlight, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line." The command was more than an order. It was a lifeline thrown to men teetering on the edge of despair. The fortress trembled under the onslaught, the air thick with the stench of damp armor and fear. But Aragorn's presence was a steady flame in the storm. He moved along the battlements, gripping shoulders, meeting wide eyes with unshaken resolve. "For every life taken, we take 10 of theirs. This wall does not fall tonight." Theoden, his face shadowed beneath his helm, watched from the high tower, his fingers tightening around his sword. Age and grief had bowed him, but the sight of Aragorn, fighting not as a king, but as a man who knew the weight of each life lost, stirred something long buried. "Who is this stranger who fights as though Rohan were his own?" he murmured. A young soldier beside him answered without hesitation. "He fights like a man who has nothing left to lose, my lord." Theoden's breath caught. That was it. Aragorn bore the same reckless courage he himself had once worn like a second skin, before sorrow had dulled his edge. Then came the explosion, a deafening roar as the outer wall shattered, fire and stone erupting into the night. The orcs poured through the gap like a black flood, their screams savage with triumph. For a heartbeat, the defenders faltered, but Aragorn was already moving, leaping down into the fray, Andúril carving a path through the enemy, to the keep. He shouted, "Fall back and reform." The retreat was orderly, each man covering the next, but the truth was undeniable. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of time. Theoden met Aragorn in the chaos of the courtyard, his sword bloody, his eyes blazing. "Is this how it ends? In the ruins of my ancestors?" Aragorn wiped sweat from his brow, his voice low and fierce. "It ends when we say it does." The words struck Theoden like a spark to tinder. The old king straightened, his grip on his sword steadying, the years sloughing away like old armor. "Then we say now." Together they turned to face the tide, their defiance a silent pact. Theoden raised his blade, his voice roaring over the din. "Ride out with me. Ride out and meet them." The gates swung open, and the last of Rohan's riders charged into the storm, Aragorn at their side. The orcs recoiled, their ranks breaking under the sudden fury of the assault. And then light, a brilliance so pure it seemed to split the sky. Gandalf stood atop the eastern ridge, Shadowfax beneath him, an army of riders at his back. The dawn had come. The enemy wavered, their snarls turning to shrieks as the tide of battle turned. Theoden laughed, the sound wild and free, as though the years had never touched him. Aragorn did not join in. His eyes were already on the horizon, where the shadows of Mordor stretched long and hungry. This victory was a respite, not an end. The true war had yet to begin, but for now, in the golden light of morning, with the cheers of men ringing in his ears, he allowed himself one quiet truth: hope was not yet lost. And that, perhaps, was enough. The air in the dim hold was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient fear, the very shadows seeming to cling like cobwebs as Aragorn stepped onto the narrow path leading into the mountain. Behind him, Legolas hesitated, his elven senses recoiling from the unnatural stillness, while Gimli's knuckles whitened around his axe. "No living man has walked this road and returned," the dwarf muttered, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Aragorn didn't flinch. "Then it is good I am not just any man," he replied, his gaze fixed ahead. The words were calm, but beneath them ran a current of something darker, the knowledge that this was no mere test of courage. The dead did not answer to bravery, they answered to blood. The cavern yawned before them, its depths swallowing the faint light from Aragorn's torch. The whispers began as soon as their footsteps echoed against the stone, voices without bodies, words without breath, a chorus of broken oaths and centuries of shame. The Oathbreakers. Legolas stiffened, his bow half drawn, but Aragorn lifted a hand. "Wait." He stepped forward alone, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "I summon you to fulfill your vow. By the lineage of Isildur, I command you, stand forth." For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the air itself seemed to shudder, the shadows coalescing into shapes, skeletal hands clutching rusted swords, hollow eyes burning with spectral fire. The king of the dead materialized before them, his voice a rasp of wind through tombs. "We swore no oath to Isildur's heir. We swore to his father, and he is dust." Aragorn's jaw tightened. This was the moment, not with steel, not with force, but with the unshakable weight of his birthright. "The blood of Elendil runs in my veins," he said, each word deliberate. "The same blood that cursed you for your betrayal. Serve me now, and I will release you. Refuse, and this mountain will hold you until the ending of the world." Silence. Then, slowly, the specter bowed its head. The journey to Pelargir was a waking nightmare, the dead flowing behind them like a river of mist, their presence chilling the very air. The corsair ships loomed on the horizon, their sails black against the setting sun, their decks crowded with invaders poised to sack Gondor's shores. The men of the city had already begun to flee, their hope as shattered as their defenses. But Aragorn stood at the water's edge, Andúril gleaming in his grip, and raised his voice above the din. "Now, fulfill your oath." The dead surged forward, their wails twisting into a howl of long-denied vengeance. The corsairs' screams were brief, swallowed by the tide of specters that swept through their ranks like a storm. Ships capsized, swords fell from lifeless hands, and in the chaos, Aragorn waded into the fray, his blade striking true, his every movement a testament to the king he had become. By dawn, it was over. The river ran red, but the dead were gone. Their torment ended at last. The survivors stared at Aragorn with something beyond gratitude, something like awe. Legolas clasped his shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. They saw what I have always seen. Gimli, for once, had no jest, only a solemn nod. Aye. A king. Aragorn turned his face toward Minas Tirith, where the white tower stood against a sky stained with smoke and flame. The path ahead was clear. The throne of Gondor awaited, and for the first time, he did not hesitate to name it his own. The white walls of Minas Tirith rose like a broken crown against the storm-darkened sky, their tears worn by centuries of wind and war. Aragorn's footsteps echoed through the silent streets, the weight of countless eyes upon him, some hopeful, others wary, all questioning. The people of Gondor had heard the tales, a ranger from the north, bearing the sword of kings, who had walked paths no living man should tread. And now he stood among them, his cloak dusty from the road, his face unreadable as the city's banners snapped in the wind. Denethor, steward of Gondor, received him in the hushed gloom of the great hall, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze sharp as a dagger's edge. So, he said, the word dripping with unspoken challenge, Isildur's heir returns at last. Tell me, son of Arathorn, do you come to claim your throne, or to watch my city burn? The air thickened with tension. Aragorn did not rise to the bait. I come to fight, he replied, his voice steady. Sauron's armies march on your gates. Whatever lies between us can wait. Faramir, standing at his father's side, studied Aragorn with quiet intensity. Here was a man who had spent his life in the shadow of a brother's legend, whose worth had been measured and found wanting by a grieving father. Yet when he spoke, his words were measured, his tone respectful. The men at Pelargir speak of you. They say the dead answered your call. Aragorn met his eyes. They answered their own oath. I merely reminded them of it. A flicker of something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of shared burdens. Faramir's loyalty to Gondor was unquestionable, but his father's disdain had carved lines of weariness into his face. Denethor scoffed. Oaths and ghosts will not save us. The enemy comes with fire and steel, and you bring us riddles. Outside, the city stirred. Word of Aragorn's arrival had spread, and with it, a murmur of something long absent, hope. Mothers pressed their children closer, whispering of ancient prophecies. Old soldiers straightened their backs, remembering stories told by campfires of a king who would return in Gondor's darkest hour. And in the shadows, the wounded and the weary turned their faces toward the white tower, as if its light might yet hold answers. Aragorn walked among them, his touch gentle on a soldier's bandaged arm, his voice low as he spoke to a trembling girl, clutching a wooden toy. He did not proclaim his lineage, he did not demand fealty, but with every quiet act, the distance between ranger and king narrowed. That night, as torches guttered in the wind, and the first distant drums of Mordor's host shook the earth, Faramir found Aragorn on the walls, staring eastward. You could take the crown now, Faramir said quietly. The people would follow you. Aragorn shook his head. A throne seized in desperation is a fragile thing. Gondor needs unity. not another division. Faramir exhaled, his breath misting in the chill air. My father will not yield, not while he draws breath. Then we fight for Gondor first, Aragorn said. The rest will come after. Somewhere below, a blacksmith's hammer rang against steel, the sound defiant against the gathering storm. The siege would come at dawn, but for now, in the quiet before the tempest, two men stood side by side, their silence louder than any oath. The fate of a kingdom hung in the balance, not in crowns or swords, but in the unspoken trust between those who would see it survive. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and smoke as the armies of Mordor closed in around Minas Tirith, their ranks stretching beyond sight, their black banners swallowing the horizon. Aragorn stood atop the battlements, his fingers curled around Andúril's hilt, the sword's edge catching the pale glow. Below, the city's defenders braced old men with spears, boys with borrowed armor, their faces etched with the same quiet terror. He knew that look. It was the stillness before the storm, the breath held before the plunge. Then the siege engines roared to life. Stone after stone crashed against the walls, each impact shuddering through the very bones of the city. The gates groaned under the assault, their ancient timbers splintering. Aragorn moved like a shadow along the lines, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hold fast, for every inch they take, we make them pay in blood. His words were a spark in the darkness, and the men rallied, their shouts raw with defiance. But then came the sound that froze even the bravest hearts, a screech like steel on bone, piercing the din. The Witch King of Angmar had come. The Nazgul's mount slammed into the gates with the force of a falling star, the wood exploding inward in a hail of splinters. The defenders stumbled back, their weapons trembling in their grips. The Witch King stepped through the ruin, his presence a suffocating weight, his hollow gaze fixed on the crumbling city. No man can kill me, he hissed, the words slithering through the air like a curse. Aragorn stepped forward. He did not flinch. He did not hesitate. Andúril blazed in his hands, its light searing through the gloom as he met the Witch King's advance. Around them, the battle raged orc against man, hope against despair. But here, in the shattered gateway, time seemed to slow. The wraith's mace swung, a blur of black iron, but Aragorn twisted aside, his counterstroke slicing through the creature's cloak. It was not enough to destroy him, but it was enough to make him falter. Then came the horns, not the deep, mournful calls of Gondor, but the clear, bright notes of Rohan, a sound like sunrise after endless night. The Witch King's head snapped toward the Pelennor fields, where a tide of horsemen thundered across the plain, their spears gleaming. Theoden led them, his voice roaring above the charge, his banner streaming like a flame. The tide was turning, but the war was far from over. In the citadel's halls, the wounded lay in rows, their moans a quieter kind of torment. Faramir and Éomer, pale as ghosts, clung to the edge of life, their breaths shallow. Aragorn knelt beside them, his hands steady despite the exhaustion weighing his limbs. He had fought as a warrior, now he would heal as a king. The Athela's leaves crumbled in his palms, their fragrance cutting through the stench of blood and sweat. As he pressed his hands to their brows, whispering the old words of his people, the room seemed to brighten, not with magic, but with something deeper, older. The hands of a king are the hands of a healer. The change was subtle at first. Then Faramir's eyelids fluttered, Éomer's fingers twitched. Gasps rippled through the hall as color returned to their cheeks, as life, impossible, undeniable, flowed back into them. The soldiers whispered, their awe spreading like wildfire. This was no mere ranger. This was the heir of Elendil. Outside, the battle still raged. Sauron's forces faltered, but they did not break. Aragorn straightened, his shoulders squaring under the weight of what lay ahead. The Pelennor was won, but the Black Gate waited, and beyond it, the fate of all Middle-earth hung in the balance. The men of Gondor had seen their king tonight. Now they would follow him into the dark. The plains before the Black Gate stretched barren and lifeless, a wasteland of cracked earth and scorched rock, where even the wind seemed to choke on the stench of sulfur. Aragorn's cloak billowed behind him as he surveyed the gathered host men of Gondor and Rohan, elves of Rivendell, dwarves of Erebor, their faces gaunt but unbroken. They were few against the endless tide of Mordor's legions, their armor dulled by dust, their swords notched from battle. This was no grand army marching to victory. This was a distraction, a sacrifice, a gamble with the highest stakes, and every soul standing there knew it. He turned to them, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. By all rights, we should not be here. The words were quiet, but they carried like a blade unsheathed. Yet here we stand, not for glory, not for conquest, but because there is something worth fighting for, even if the fight itself seems hopeless. His gaze swept over them, lingering on the youngest, the oldest, the wounded leaning on their spears. Sauron believes you are afraid. He believes fear will make you weak, but I see no fear here. I see courage. I see men, elves, and dwarves who choose to stand when the world tells them to fall. A murmur rippled through the ranks, shoulders straightening, chins lifting. Gimli hefted his axe, his grin fierce beneath his beard. Aye, and will give the foul folk of Mordor a tale to haunt their nightmares. Legolas knocked an arrow, his eyes bright with the fire of his people. For Frodo, he said simply, the name spread through the host like a spark. Halfling ringbearer, the one who carried their hope into the heart of darkness. Then the gates groaned open. The ground trembled as the armies of Mordor poured forth, a sea of snarling orcs and towering trolls, their weapons glinting under the sickly light. Aragorn drew Andúril, its blade catching the dim glow like a sliver of dawn. For Frodo, he roared, and the charge began. The clash was chaos. Steel on steel, screams and war cries, the earth churning beneath their feet. Aragorn fought like a man possessed, his sword a blur, his every strike a testament to the king he had become. Around him, his allies fell, rose, fell again. Theoden's riders carved through the enemy lines, their horses' hooves kicking up sprays of black earth. The elves moved like shadows, their arrows finding throats and eyes with deadly precision. And still, the enemy came. Then the world shook, a rumble deeper than thunder, a tremor that sent friend and foe alike stumbling. Aragorn's head snapped toward Mount Doom, where the sky had turned an impossible shade of crimson. Fire erupted from the peak, a column of flame and ash that split the heavens. For a heartbeat, the battlefield stilled, every eye fixed on the distant mountain. And in that moment, Aragorn knew Frodo had done it. The earth buckled, the black gate cracked like rotten wood, and from the heart of Mordor came a sound, a wail of fury and despair, the death cry of a fallen god. Sauron's tower crumbled, his armies dissolving into smoke and shadow, their forms unraveling like nightmares at dawn. The eye, that terrible, burning gaze, flickered once and went dark. Silence. Then, like the first breath after drowning, a cheer rose from the survivors, ragged and disbelieving. Aragorn dropped to his knees, Andúril slipping from his fingers, his hands pressing into the scorched earth, as if he could feel the world itself healing beneath his palms. The war was over. The age of men had begun, and somewhere, beyond the smoke and ruin, a hobbit's stubborn heart still beat. The morning sun spilled over the white towers of Minas Tirith like liquid gold, the air alive with the scent of fresh blossoms strewn across the streets. The city, so long shrouded in grief, now pulsed with a joy so fierce it seemed to shake the very stones beneath their feet. Aragorn stood at the foot of the throne dais, clad not in the finery of kings, but in the simple, travel-worn garb of a ranger, a silent testament to the journey that had brought him here. The crown of Gondor rested in Gandalf's hands, its silver leaves catching the light, but it was the weight of the moment, not the crown, that made Aragorn's breath catch. The wizard's voice carried over the hushed crowd, rich with the gravity of centuries. By the blood of your lineage and the strength of your deeds, the throne is yours. Yet as Gandalf lifted the crown, Aragorn hesitated. His gaze swept over the faces before him. Frodo, pale but smiling, Sam's hand steady on his shoulder, Legolas and Gimli, their camaraderie unbroken, the hobbits, their small frames dwarfed by the grandeur of the hall, but their spirits towering. This was not his victory alone. No crown was ever won by one hand, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He knelt before the hobbits, his head bowed. Yours are the names that will echo in the songs of this age. Without you, there would be no kingdom to reclaim. The crowd erupted, tears glistening on weathered faces, but the loudest cheer came not from the people of Gondor, but from a voice Aragorn would know in the darkest of nights. Arwen, she stood at the edge of the gathering, her gown like starlight woven into silk, her laughter the sound of rivers returning to dry lands. Aragorn's composure shattered. In 3 strides, he was before her, his hands cradling her face as if she might vanish like a dream. You came, he whispered, her fingers curled around his wrists, her touch as steady as the roots of ancient trees. I told you long ago, my love, I choose the life of a mortal, and there is no life for me but at your side. The coronation feast spilled into the streets, music and laughter rising like a tide, but Aragorn stole a moment alone on the balcony, the weight of the crown still unfamiliar on his brow. Below, children danced around the hobbits, their wounds faded but not forgotten. Farmers and soldiers broke bread together, their differences erased by shared survival. Gondor was free, but freedom was only the beginning. The fields lay fallow, the roads unsafe, the wounds of war still raw in 100 villages. A king's work was not in the glory of battle, but in the quiet, relentless labor of healing. A hand touched his shoulder. Gandalf, his eyes twinkling beneath the brim of his hat. You wear it well, he murmured. Aragorn shook his head. I wear it as a man who knows how much he does not know. The wizard chuckled. Good, that makes you wiser than most kings. He gestured to the revelry below. Let them celebrate tonight. Tomorrow, the work begins. And so, as the stars wheeled overhead, and the last notes of the feast faded into the night, Aragorn stood between his past and his future, the ranger who had walked in shadows, the king who would walk in light. The road ahead would be long, But for the first time in his life, he did not walk it alone. The first light of peace in Gondor did not come with fanfare or feasting, but with the quiet scrape of a shovel breaking parched earth. Aragorn knelt in the fields of Pelennor, his hands black with soil, his brow damp with sweat, as he helped farmers replant orchards burned to ash by war. The people watched at first in stunned silence, their king, dressed like a common laborer, working beside them as though the crown on his head weighed no more than a straw hat. But by the third day, the hesitant whispers turned into laughter, and soon the fields were alive with voices and the rhythmic thud of hoes turning the earth. This was how healing began, not with grand decrees from a marble throne, but with shared blisters and bent backs under the same unforgiving sun. In the citadel, the chambers that had once echoed with Denethor's cold decrees now hummed with a different energy. Aragorn sat not atop the steward's chair, but beside it, maps and ledgers spread between him and Faramir as they debated how to rebuild bridges, how to route grain to starving villages, how to coax trade back to a kingdom that had known only siege for generations. Faramir, his shoulders no longer hunched under the ghost of his father's disappointment, traced a finger along the Anduin. "The river folk say the southern waters are still tainted," he murmured. Aragorn nodded. "Then we send healers, not soldiers." The simplicity of the words belied their weight. This was the new Gondor, a land where mercy outranked might. Word spread of the king who walked among his people not in procession, but alone, his cloak frayed at the hem from miles of dusty roads. In Ithilien, he knelt beside widows to rebuild stone fences. In Anórien, he listened to shepherds' tales of wolves grown bold in the war's chaos. "You ask much of us, my lord," murmured an old woman in Losarnak as she handed him a cup of bitter herbal tea. Aragorn smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "No more than I ask of myself." And then, one morning, a cry rang through the courtyards of Minas Tirith. The white tree, long withered, had sprouted a single new shoot, its leaves pale as moonlight against the dark bark. The gardeners wept as they tended it, their hands trembling. Aragorn stood beneath its branches, Faramir at his side, the wind carrying the scent of blossoms from the lower circles. "It was not the sword that brought this back," Faramir said softly. Aragorn touched the young leaves, their edges still soft as parchment. "No, it was the hands that believed it could grow." Beyond the city walls, the land bore scars that would take decades to fade. But in the markets, coins now changed hands without fear. In the taverns, songs were sung that did not speak of war. And in the quiet of the evenings, when the lanterns were lit along the winding streets, children chased fireflies beneath a sky no longer stained with smoke. The king watched from his balcony, a letter from the Shire, clasped in his hand Frodo's spidery script, recounting the blooming of party trees and the laughter of hobbit children. Aragorn's throat tightened. This was the victory no battle could have won, the ordinary, stubborn miracle of life, insisting on renewal. In the years to come, historians would write of Aragorn's reign as an age of restored glory. But those who lived through it would remember smaller things, the way the king's boots were always muddy, the way he remembered every name spoken to him, the way he paused in his duties to kneel in the gardens, his fingers brushing the white tree's roots as if listening to secrets whispered up from the earth itself. Gondor was not rebuilt in a day, nor by one man's hand, but with each seed planted, each wound bound, each story shared over a fireside. The kingdom remembered what it meant to thrive. The northern wind carried the scent of crumbling stone and ancient earth as Aragorn rode through the ruins of Minas, his horse's hooves whispering through overgrown courtyards where kings once walked. The great city of Arnor lay broken, its towers skeletal against the twilight, its streets choked with brambles and memory. Yet as he dismounted, his boots sinking into moss-covered flagstones, he felt not despair, but a quiet stirring. The land itself seemed to recognize him, as if the stones had been waiting centuries for the return of their rightful lord. The Dunedain emerged from the shadows of the ruins like ghosts given form, their cloaks gray as the dusk, their faces lined with years of silent vigilance. Their leader, Halbarad, stepped forward, his hand clasping Aragorn's forearm in a grip forged by shared blood and shared hardship. "The North remembers its king," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Aragorn's reply was soft, but carried the weight of an oath, and its king has not forgotten his people. Around them, children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with wonder. These were the descendants of Numenor, their lineage diluted but unbroken, their loyalty unshaken by time. In the weeks that followed, the ruins awoke. Dwarven craftsmen from the Blue Mountains arrived at Aragorn's call, their hammers ringing against stone as they cleared rubble and reforged bridges. Elven envoys from Lindon brought seeds from the west, planting saplings where the roots of kings had once grown deep, and the Dunedain, long scattered, gathered in numbers not seen since the fall of Arnor, their tents dotting the hills like stars, returned to the sky. It was not just a rebuilding, it was a rebirth. One evening, as the council fire burned low, Aragorn unrolled a map yellowed with age, its edges frayed, but its markings still clear. "The North will not live in the shadow of the past," he said, tracing the lines of forgotten roads, "but neither will we repeat its mistakes. Gondor's strength lies in its unity. Ours will too." Yet even as the first stones of the new citadel were laid, whispers came from the edges of the land, tales of creatures stirring in the dark places, of shapes seen beyond the firelight in the wilds beyond the Shire. A rider from Bree brought word of disappearances along the Greenway. A dwarf trader spoke of a coldness creeping into the halls of the misty mountains, as though some old malice had woken from long slumber. Aragorn listened, his face unreadable in the firelight, but his fingers tightened around the hilt of Andúril. Peace, it seemed, was not the absence of war, but the will to guard against its return. On the eve of his departure, he stood once more in the ruins of Minas, the moon silvering the broken arches. Halbarad joined him, his gaze following the path of the Bruinen River as it wound toward the distant sea. "You ride south again?" he asked. Aragorn nodded. "The North is in your hands now, but Gondor's throne does not make me less a son of Arnor. A king must rule with one eye on the horizon and the other on the roots beneath his feet." The wind shifted, carrying the distant howl of a wolf, or something far older. Aragorn's cloak billowed behind him like a banner unfurling. The work here was only beginning. But then, so was the watch. The golden light of late summer bathed the gardens of Minas Tirith in a warmth that seemed to linger just for them. Petals from the white tree drifted on the breeze like snowflakes, caught in a dream, settling on the path where Aragorn stood, his breath unsteady for the first time in memory. The elven robes he wore, silver-threaded and light as mist, felt foreign against his skin, a stark contrast to the worn leather and mail that had been his second skin for so long. But when the music began, harp strings plucked by elven hands, notes rising like water over stone, all else fell away. Arwen emerged between the arches of the courtyard, her gown shimmering with the captured light of 1,000 stars, her dark hair woven with blossoms from Lothlórien. The crowd of elves and men drew breath as one, but Aragorn saw only her eyes, how they held the depth of the ages and the brightness of a single, unwavering flame. Elrond, standing solemn as an oak at her side, placed her hand in Aragorn's, his own grip lingering for a heartbeat. "You have my blessing," he murmured, though the grief beneath the words was unmistakable. The last daughter of Rivendell would choose a mortal life, and her father, who had seen the rise and fall of empires, could do nothing to stay the turning of time. Their vows were spoken not in the grand tongue of kings or the flowing speech of elves, but in the quiet words of their own hearts, syllables worn smooth by years of secret meetings and stolen glances. Aragorn's voice shook only once when he promised to love her for all the days I am given, the truth of those words settling between them like a weight. Arwen's answer was a whisper, but it carried the force of a vow etched into the bones of the earth. "And I will love you beyond them." The feast that followed spilled from the citadel into the streets, where even the poorest of Gondor's people raised cups in toast. Elves danced with farmers, dwarves clinked tankards with scribes, and for a night, the scars of war faded beneath the sheer, defiant joy of the moment. Yet as the stars wheeled overhead, Aragorn found himself slipping away, drawn to the quiet of the balcony where Arwen stood, her profile etched against the moonlight. "You're thinking of it too," she said, not turning. He didn't need to ask what she meant. The shadow of his mortality had always been the unspoken guest at their table, the price of her choice. He gathered her hands in his, pressing them to his lips. "I would trade every crown in Middle-earth for more time," he admitted, the raw honesty of it startling even him. Arwen smiled, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Then we must make the time we have into something even the undying lands could not rival." And so they did. In the years that followed, their love became the stuff of song, not for its grand gestures, but for the quiet, steadfast way it wove itself into the fabric of Gondor's rebirth. Aragorn planted a sapling from Lothlórien beside the white tree, its roots twining with those of the ancient symbol of kingship, a living testament to the union of elf and man. Arwen taught the healers of the city the arts of her people, her hands gentle on the wounds of war that still lingered in flesh and spirit alike. They ruled not as distant monarchs, but as partners who walked the streets of Minas Tirith with linked fingers, who paused to listen to the fears of a fishmonger as readily as those of a lord. But in the deepest hours of the night, when the torches guttered and the palace lay still, Aragorn would wake to the feel of Arwen's fingers, tracing the lines of his face, as though memorizing them. And he, in turn, would count the beats of her heart against his palm, each one a treasure more precious than any jewel. The shadow would come for him, swift as a winter wind or slow as a creeping tide, but until then, they would fill their days with enough light to outshine the darkness. The harbor at the Grey Havens lay bathed in the pale gold light of late afternoon, the air thick with the salt of the sea and the bittersweet scent of elven song. Ships with silver sails lined the docks, their prows carved like swans, poised for flight, ready to carry the last of the firstborn across the sundering seas. Aragorn stood apart from the gathered elves, his boots rooted to the earth he would never leave, his heart heavy with the weight of endings. Legolas approached first, his footsteps silent on the weathered wood, his face unreadable in the shifting light. No words passed between them at first. None were needed. The elf's hand rested on Aragorn's shoulder, his grip familiar as the hilt of a sword they had once wielded side by side. Strange, Legolas murmured at last, his voice barely louder than the sigh of the tide. To sail toward the undying lands, and yet feel as though I am leaving something immortal behind. Aragorn's throat tightened. Their friendship had spanned decades of war and peace, a bond forged in the dark of Moria and tempered on the fields of the Pelennor. To name it now would be to acknowledge its passing, and neither could bear it. Gimli, ever unflinching in the face of sentiment, cleared his throat loudly, his beard bristling as he scowled at the ships. "Fool elves," he grumbled, though his voice lacked its usual fire, "dragging me across water like some floating mountain. I'll be the first dwarf to set foot in Valinor, and likely the last, unless I sink the blasted boat myself." The jest fell flat, but his eyes, when they met Aragorn's, were bright with unspoken sorrow. Aragorn clasped the dwarf's forearm, his fingers brushing the scars Gimli had earned in the deep places of the world. "Promise me this," he said quietly. "When you walk those shores, tell the trees of Lothlórien that their memory still blooms in the hearts of men." Gimli's laughter was rough, but his nod was solemn. "Aye, and I'll tell the rocks of Khazad-dûm that their halls are not forgotten either." The horn sounded then, a clear note that shivered through the air like a summons. The elves began to board, their voices mingling in a farewell hymn that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the world. Legolas hesitated, his gaze lingering on the distant line of the misty mountains, their peaks flushed with the last light of day. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "what songs they will sing of us in the years to come?" Aragorn smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Let them sing of bridges built, not battles won. Of hands joined across races, not swords raised in wrath." The gangplank lifted, the sails caught the wind, and as the ship slipped away from the shore, Aragorn stood motionless, watching until the silver hull was no more than a glimmer on the horizon. The age of elves and dwarves and the great tales of old was ending, but the age of men his age was only just beginning. He turned away at last, his boots scuffing the dust of the road that led back to Minas Tirith, back to the work of kingship. The breeze carried the faintest echo of elven song, a whisper of what had been and what would never be again. Yet beneath the grief, there was a quiet certainty, as steady as the roots of the white tree deep in the earth. The world would change, but some things, friendship, honor, the slow and stubborn work of healing would endure. And so the king walked on, his shadow long in the setting sun, ready to meet the dawn of a new era. The years stretched like golden threads, woven into the tapestry of Gondor's rebirth. Each season, adding its own hue to the kingdom Aragorn had fought so fiercely to restore. Fields that once lay fallow now swayed with grain, their bounty filling the bellies of children who had never known the bite of hunger. Streets that had echoed with the clang of swords now hummed with the voices of merchants, haggling over spices from Harad and timber from Dale. The White Tower, once a symbol of fading glory, stood renewed, its banners fluttering in winds that carried no scent of smoke or war. Yet for all the grandeur of his reign, Aragorn's true legacy was written in quieter moments, kneeling beside a farmer to mend a broken fence, listening to the grievances of a shepherd with the same gravity as those of a lord, or laughing as Eldarion, his dark-haired son, chased butterflies through the citadel gardens with the same boundless curiosity Aragorn himself had known in Rivendell. Hidden glades, raising a child to rule, was a battle without swords, a test of patience and wisdom. Aragorn taught Eldarion not with scrolls of law or dry lectures on statecraft, but by example, showing him how to listen before speaking, how mercy could be stronger than any decree, how a king's strength lay not in the weight of his crown, but in the depth of his compassion. They rode together through the countryside, the boy's small hands fumbling with the reins as Aragorn pointed out the places where history had been made. The hill where the beacons of Gondor had flared to life, the riverbank where the dead had been released from their oath, the grove where the white tree had first stirred anew. A king must know the land as he knows his own heart, Aragorn would say, his voice rough with the memory of his own long wandering, for the land remembers what men forget. Time, relentless and unyielding, wore at even the mightiest of kings. The hands that had once wielded Andúril with effortless grace now trembled faintly when lifting a goblet. The voice that had rallied armies grew softer, though no less steady. Aragorn felt the approach of his end, not with fear, but with a quiet certainty, like the turning of leaves in autumn. He walked off into the House of Kings, where the tombs of his forebears stood in silent vigil, and there he would sit for hours, speaking to them as if they could hear, of the burdens they had borne, the mistakes he had striven not to repeat, the hope he had tried to leave for those who would come after. Arwen, her hair still dark as midnight, but her eyes carrying the weight of her choice, would find him there, her fingers lacing through his with a grip that spoke of love stronger than death. When the day came, he gathered his family and his council one last time in the great hall, the afternoon light painting the marble floors with patterns of gold. Eldarion, now a man grown with a king's bearing and his father's quiet strength, knelt beside him. Aragorn placed the crown upon his son's brow, his hands lingering for a heartbeat. Rule wisely, he whispered, and remember that the highest throne is but a chair unless the people lift you to it. The room held its breath as he rose, his steps slow but unwavering, and walked to the balcony where the wind carried the scent of the sea. Below, the city stretched in all its vibrant, imperfect glory, the kingdom he had loved, fought for, and served. His passing was as gentle as a sigh at dusk, his body laid to rest beside the kings of old, his name etched into stone and story. But legends are not made of marble alone. They lived in the laughter of children who played unafraid in the streets, in the songs sung by firesides of the king who had walked among his people as one of them, in the whispered hope that when darkness threatened, another like Elessar might rise. And so he endured, not as a ghost of the past, but as a light that still warmed the hearts of those who remembered. The age of Aragorn had ended, but the age he had built, that would live on. The last light of evening painted the rooftops of Minas Tirith in shades of amber and rose, the air sweet with the scent of honeysuckle, climbing the white walls. In a quiet corner of the city's sixth circle, where the cobblestones still bore the faint scars of war, an old soldier settled onto a worn wooden bench, his cloak draped over knees that had marched 1,000 miles. Around him, children gathered like moths drawn to a flame, their faces upturned, their bare toes wriggling in the cool grass. "Tell us again," begged a girl with braids the color of wheat, her elbows propped on his knee. "Tell us about the king." The old man chuckled, the sound rough as tree bark, and reached for the pipe tucked in his belt. "Which story, little one? The warrior who walked with elves, the healer who mended broken men with nothing but leaves and whispered words, or the ranger who became a king because he knew the names of every farmer and blacksmith from here to the Black Gate?" The children exchanged glances, their silence an answer. They wanted all of it, every legend, every scrap of magic woven into the tapestry of Aragorn's life. So he began, as he had 100 times before, with the tale of a crown reforged from shards of history, of a sword that blazed like captured sunrise in the hands of its rightful bearer. But tonight, his voice lingered not on battles or glory, but on quieter things, the way Aragorn had knelt in the mud to lift a fallen comrade, how he'd paused mid-march to listen to an old woman's complaint about her missing goats, the nights he'd spent reading by candlelight while the weight of a kingdom pressed upon his shoulders. "A king's might isn't measured in battles won," the soldier murmured, tapping ash from his pipe. "It's in the moments when he chooses kindness over power, when he carries the weight of the world without letting it harden his heart." One of the boys, freckled and gap-toothed, frowned. "But what about the monsters, the big fights?" The old man's eyes crinkled. "Oh, there were plenty of those. But the truest test wasn't the Balrog or the Black Gate. It was waking up the next morning and choosing to build instead of destroy, to plant seeds where fire had burned." He pointed to the white tree, its blossoms glowing like pearls in the twilight. "That's why it still grows," because he remembered that victory isn't just about surviving the storm. It's about tending what sprouts after. The stars emerged one by one above the city, their light reflected in the children's wide eyes. Somewhere in the citadel, a lute began to play, its melody weaving through the evening air like a thread of memory. The old soldier leaned back, his stories spent for the night. "Go on now," he said softly, shooing them toward home. But as they scampered away, their laughter trailing behind them, he knew the tales would live on. In their games, in their dreams, in the way they'd someday tell their own children of a king who walked among his people not as a legend, but as a man. High above, the wind stirred the banners of the Tower of Ithilien, their fabric rippling like a sigh. The city slept, safe and whole, its streets humming with the ordinary music of life. A blacksmith's hammer, a baker kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, the murmur of lovers beneath the stars. And if you listened closely, in the space between breaths, you might just hear it, the echo of a promise kept, of a crown earned not by blood alone, but by countless small acts of courage. The night deepened, the stories remained, and somewhere beyond the circles of the world, a king and his queen walked still, their love outshining even the memory of darkness.
you.